Welcome back to Tartarian Tales number 60. And I've got a good one again today, and we're going to go back to Mendez Pinto in his travels, because I miss Mendez Pinto. He's a good escape from reality, although I am going to partially combine this chapter with reality, because the chapter is called The Election of the New Roolim of Mounay, the Grand Telegrapo of these Gentiles of the Kingdom of Pegu. And so since the election debacle just happened all over America and Brazil and all over the world, really, elections are kind of always going on, and they're pretty corrupt. So I wanted to take a look at the elections from this era of this area, which I believe is around the Indonesia and the islands there. Mendez Pinto, his explorations are fantastic. If you've seen any of my older Tartarian tales, I use a lot from this book. And I had left this chapter out, and now it's perfectly relevant because I'm curious about the election process of back in the day. Has it always been corrupt? Hundreds of years ago, did these foreign kind of island nations do it the right way? And were they, in the ancient past, were they trusting the way things worked? And actually, maybe they existed through time without corruption leading the way and ruining the natural flow of everything. So I wanted to check it out. It's got I read it over a little bit. It's got a lot of good insight and very interesting things. So let's see, and let's compare this to our time. And again, this is from the 1600s, early 16, late 1500s, when he was doing his travels. So here we go. His takes are fresh and they are amazing, and this one is no different. So here we go. Page 248 from Mendez Pinto, and I'll put the link below. The next day, between 7 and 8 in the morning, which was the time when the ashes of the deceased began to be cold, the king and all the great lords of the court came unto the place where the body had been burnt, marching all in order after the manner of a stately procession, and assisted by all the gripos, amongst whom there were 130 with silver centers, and 14 with mitres of gold on their heads. They were apparelled in long robes of yellow satin. As for all the rest, to the number of 10,000, they were clothed with taffeta of the same color, and with a kind of surplice of fine linen, which was not done without a very great charge, by reason of the number of them. Being arrived at the place where the Roolim had been burnt, after some ceremonies performed, as is usual with them, according to the time and sense that everyone had of it, a telegrapo of the Brahma nation, an uncle to the king, as brother to his father, whom the people held for the blessed of them all, having been chosen to preach that day, went up into the pulpit for that effect. The beginning of his sermon was an elegy touching the defunct, whose life he commended with many speeches that made for his purpose, wherein he grew so earnest and hot, as turning himself to the king with tears in his eyes, and lifting up his voice somewhat louder, to the end he might hear him the better, he said unto him, If the kings in these times wherein we live do consider how little a time they have to live, and with what rigor of justice they shall be chastised by the almighty hand of the Most High God for the crimes of their tyrannical lives, possibly it would be better for them to feed in the open fields like brutish beasts, than to be so absolute in their will, and to use it with so little reason, even as to be cruel to the good, and slack in punishing the wicked, whom by their sovereign power they have put into greatness and authority, just like today. And truly they are much to be lamented, whose good fortune hath raised them up to an estate so dangerous as is that of kings at this day, by reason of the insolence and liberty wherein they continually live, without so much as the least apprehension of any fear or shame. But you must know, O ye blinded of the world, that God hath made you kings to use clemency towards men, to give them audience, to content, to chastise them, but not to kill them tyrannically. Nevertheless, O ye bad kings, in the condition whereunto you are raised, you oppose yourselves to the nature which God hath endued you with, and take up on you many other different forms, in appareling yourselves every hour with some such livery as seems best unto you, to the end you may be to the one very bloodsuckers, that incessantly suck from their goods and their lives, never leaving them so long as they have one drop of blood in their veins. And to others you are dreadful roaring lions, who to give a mask and a color to your ambition and avarice cause supreme laws of death to be published for the least faults, and all for to confiscate other men's goods, which is the main end of your pretensions. Contrarily, if there be any that you love, and unto whom you or the world, or I know not, what have given the name of grandees, you are so negligent in chastising their proud humors, and so prodigal in enriching them with the spoils and undoing of the poor, whom you have left naked and even slayed to the very quick, as you cannot doubt but that they will one day accuse you before God for all these things, when you will have no excuse to make, so that there will be nothing left you but a dreadful confusion to trouble you, and to put you into a horrible disorder. Boy, do I wish someone would jump in front of Congress in America and say that right to the president's face and everyone else. But let's keep going. To these he added so many of her remonstrances in favor of the poor subjects, cried out so mainly and shed so many tears on their behalf, as the king remained almost besides himself, and was touched so nearly therewith that he instantly called Brazagaran, the governor of Pegu, unto him, and commanded him without all delay to dismiss all the deputies of the provinces of the kingdom, whom he had caused to be assembled in the town of Kosman, for to demand of them a great sum of money, that he might set upon the kingdom of Savadi, on which he had newly resolved to make war. Withal, he sware publicly on the ashes of the defunct that during his reign he would never charge his subjects with imports, nor would make them to serve by force, as he had formerly done. Yea, and that for the future he would have a most special care to hear the poor, and to do them justice against the misdemeanors of the great ones, conformable to the merit of everyone, together with many other things, very just and good, which might well serve for a lesson to us that are Christians. All the promises in the world, same exact game. This sermon being finished, the ashes of the defunct which had been gathered up was distributed as a relic into 14 golden basins, whereof the king himself took up one on his head, and the greppos of chiefest quality carried the rest. So the procession going from thence in the same order as it came thither, those ashes were conveyed into a very rich temple, which might be some flight shot from that place, and named Quie Dossier, that is, the God of the afflicted of the earth. There they were put into a shallow grave, without other pomp or vanity, for so had i600s, the late Roolim, commanded. This grave then was environed about with 3 iron grates, and with 2 of silver, and 1 of latten, and upon 3 iron rods that crossed the whole breadth of the chapel, hung 72 lamps of silver, namely 4 and 20 on each of them, all of great value, and fastened together with great silver chains. Furthermore, there were placed about the steps whereby one descended into the grave 36 little perfuming pots, with benjamin, aloes, and other confection, wherein was great store of ambergris, all which was not finished till it was almost night, by reason of the many ceremonies used in this funeral. All that day long they freed an infinite number of birds, which had been brought thither in above 100 cages, these Gentiles being of the opinion that they were so many souls of deceased persons, which before times had passed out of this life, and that were deposited, as it were, in the bodies of those birds, till the day of their deliverance should come, at which time they were in all liberty to accompany the soul of the defunct. The like they did with a great many of the little fishes, which had been transported thither also in certain vessels full of water, so that to let them at liberty they cast them into the river with another new ceremony, to the end they might serve the soul of him whose ashes were then buried. There was also brought thither all kind of venison and fowl, which was distributed as an alms to all the poor that were present there, whereof the number was almost infinite. These ceremonies and other such like which were performed in this action being finished, the king, in regard it was near night, retired into his quarter, where he had caused tents to be pitched for to lodge in, and that in sign of mourning the like did all the great ones, so that all the assembly by little and little withdrew. The next morning, as soon as it was the day, the king made it to be proclaimed that all persons of what condition soever they were should upon pain of death dislodge speedily out of the island, and that they which were priests should return to the attendance of their cures, with this penalty, in case of contravention, to be degraded from their dignity. Whereupon all the priests went presently out of the island, 90 of them excepted, who were deputed for the election of him that was to succeed in the place of the defunct. These same then assembled in the house of Gangiparo to acquit themselves of their charge, and for that in the 2 first days, which was the term limited to make this election, it could not succeed by reason of the diversity of opinions, and great contrariety that was found amongst them which were to give their votes. The king thought fit that out of those deputed 90 there should be 9 be chosen, who alone should make the election. This resolution being taken, these 9 continued 5 days and as many nights, together in a continual prayer. In the meantime, a world of offerings were made and alms given. A great number of poor people were also clothed, and tables prepared, where all men that would might eat of free cost. And all this was accompanied with processions in every quarter. At last, these 9 being agreed in conformity of votes, elected for Roolim one Menicha Monchen, who at that time was a capizondo, or prelate, in the town of Daigum, of a pagode called Que Figrao, that is to say, God of the atoms of the sun, of whom I have oftentimes spoken. He was a man of about 68 years of age, accounted amongst them for a holy personage, very knowing in the customs and laws of those sects of the Gentiles, and above a one exceeding charitable to the poor. With this election, the king and all the great ones of the court remained very well satisfied. The king then speedily dispatched away the Chamigrem, his foster brother, to whom he gave thereupon the title of Kautolanha, which signifies the king's brother, to the end he might be the more honorably qualified with 100 laulais, wherein was the flower of all the Brahma nobility, together with the 9 electors, for to go and fetch him, which had been newly chosen to the dignity of Roolim, and having brought him 9 days after with a great deal of respect and honor to a place called Tagala, some 5 leagues from the isle of Mounay, the king met him with all the great men of the court, besides a world of other people, and above 2,000 vessels with oars. When he was come in this equipage where the new Roolim was, he prostrated himself before him, and kissing the ground 3 times, O thou holy pearl, said he unto him, which art in the midst of the sun, breathe forth upon me by an agreeable inspiration of the Lord of uncreated power, that I may not dread upon earth the insupportable yoke of mine enemies. God, I love when they speak in these books. At these words, the new Roolim, putting forth his hand to raise him from the ground, spake thus unto him, Labor, my son, that thy works may be pleasing to God, and I will pray for thee without ceasing. Hereupon the king rising up, the Roolim made him sit down by him, and stroked him 3 times with his hands on his head, which the king took for the greatest honor he could do him. Then having said something unto him which we could not hear, for that we were a little too far off, he blowed 3 times on the king's head, whilst he was on his knees again before him, and all the people laid flat on the earth. This done, he parted from that place amidst the applauses that were given him from all parts, and the sound of bells and instruments of music, and embarked himself in the king's laulea, where he was seated in a rich chair of gold, set with precious stones, and the king at his feet, which was also taken for a great honor done him by the Roolim. Round about, and a little distant from him, were 12 little boys attired in yellow satin, with scarves of silver tinsel, golden maces, and scepters in their hands. All along the sides of the vessel, instead of mariners, stood the lords of the kingdom with gilt oars by them, and as well in the poop as the prow were 2 choirs of young striplings, apparelled in carnation satin, and having divers sorts of instruments in their hands, to the tune whereof they sung the praises of God. Some of our company observed that one of their songs said thus, Children of a pure heart, praise this admirable and divine Lord, for as for me, being a sinner, I am not worthy to do it. And if that too be not permitted unto you, let your eyes weep before his feet, that so you may render yourselves agreeable unto him. In the same manner, they sung many other songs to the tune of their instruments, and with so much ardor and zeal as if they had been Christians, it would have been able to have stirred up the devotion of them that heard them. After that, the Roolim was in this sumptuous fort, arrived at the city of Martabano. He did not go to land, as it had been resolved, because it was night, for it was not lawful for him at any hand to touch the ground with his feet, in regard of the great dignity of his person, but stayed till the next morning, at which time the king disembarked him first of all upon his own shoulders, and so too did the princes and great lords of the kingdom carry him alternately to the pagode of Quia Posadea, as being the greatest and most sumptuous of the whole city, in the midst whereof was a theatre richly set forth of yellow satin, which is the livery of that sovereign dignity. There, out of a new ceremony, being laid all along upon a little bed of gold, he made as though he were dead, and then at the sound of a bell which gave 3 tolls, the bonzes prostrated themselves all with their faces on the ground for the space of half an hour, during which time all the assistants, for a sign of sadness, held their hands before their eyes, and saying aloud, Lord, recall this, thy servant, to a new life, to the end we may have one to pray for us. Instantly thereupon they took him from thence, and put him into a tomb adorned with the same livery, then chanting out certain, I know not what very sorrowful words, with tears in their eyes, they left him, after they had surrounded the temple thrice, in a grave made expressly for that purpose, covered over with a cloth of black velvet, and environed about with dead men's heads. This done, they said certain prayers after their manner, weeping, which very much moved the king. And then all the throngs of people that made a strange noise, being commanded to silence, they gave 3 tolls with a great bell, for a sign to all the rest of the bells in the city to answer them, as they did with so horrible and dreadful a din, that the earth even trembled therewith. After the ceasing of this noise, 2 telegrapos, men of great reputation amongst them, and very well versed in their laws, went up into 2 pulpits, prepared expressly for them, and that were hung with rich Turkey carpets, where they entertained their auditors with the subject of this ceremony, and gave them the explication of everything, making an ample relation unto them of the life and death of the deceased Roolim, and of the election of this same, together with the excellent qualities with which he was endued for to be raised so to high a charge whereunto he was called by a particular grace of God. To this they added many other things, wherewith the people were exceedingly satisfied and contented. Then the same bell having tolled 3 times more, the 2 priests descended from their pulpits, which together with all their furniture were presently burned with another new kind of ceremony, whereof I will forbear here making a relation, because it seems unnecessary to me to lose time in these superfluities, having said but too much already thereof. After all, things were peaceable and quiet, and that for the space of 5 or 6 credos nothing had been spoken. There appeared coming from the next temple, which was about a flight shot off, a very rich and sumptuous procession of little children, attired all in white taffets, for a mark of their innocency and pureness. They had about their necks a number of jewels, chains of gold upon their legs in form of bracelets, while wax lights in their hands, and upon their heads bonnets embroidered with silk and gold, and set with pearls, rubies, and sapphires. In the middle of this procession was a rich canopy of cloth of gold, which 12 of those little children carried, environed round about with perfuming pans and cancers of silver, from whence breathed forth excellent odors most pleasing to the scent. The little children played on diverse instruments of music, and went on singing praises to God, and praying him to resuscitate this defunct to a new life. When they were arrived at the place where the Roolim lay, they drew to the shrine, and taking away the cloth wherewith it was covered, there came out of it a little child, which could not be above 3 or 4 years old, and although he was naked, yet was not his nakedness seen, because he was all covered over with gold and precious stones, and appeared in the same fashion as we are accustomed to paint angels. He had also golden wings, and a very rich crown upon his head. When as he come from out of the shrine, the assistants being prostrated on the ground, fell to saying aloud, with a voice that made those to tremble which heard them, Thou, angel of God, sent from heaven for our salvation, pray for us when thou returneth thither again. The king went instantly to this child, and having taken him in his arms with a great deal of respect and a strange ceremony, as if he would show that he was not worthy to touch him, in regard he was an angel sent from the heaven, he set him on the brink of the grave, whereafter the child had taken away the cloth of black velvet that covered him. Whilst all were on their knees, with their hands and eyes lift up to heaven, he said aloud, as if he had spoken to him, Thou which hast been conceived in sin, amidst the misery and filthiness of the flesh, God commands thee by me, who am the least of his servants, that thou do resuscitate to a new life which may be agreeable unto him, always dreading the chastisement of his mighty hand, to the end that at the last gasp of thy life thou mayest not stumble like the children of the world, and that from this place where thou art extended stark dead, thou do rise up presently, because it hath been so decreed by the greatest of the greatest in the temple of the earth, and come after me, and come after, and same after me, and come after me. The king thereupon took this child again in his arms, and then the Roolim, rising up in the grave where he was, as it were amazed with this vision, fell on his knees before the child whom the king held, and said, I accept of this new grace from the hand of the Lord, conformably to that which thou hast told me from him, obliging myself to be even till death an example of humility in the least of all his, to the end the toads of the earth may not lose themselves in the abundance of the world. This said, the child rid himself again out of the king's arms, and going directly to the grave, he lent the Roolim his hand to help him out of it. Now he was scarce come forth, when as they gave 5 tolls with a bell, which was a sign for all the people to prostrate themselves on the ground the second time, saying, Blessed be thou, O Lord, for so great a grace. Whereupon all the bells in the city began to ring, and all the ordnance that were on the land to shoot off, as also those of above 2,000 vessels that rode at anchor in that port, from whence proceeded so strange a noise as was most insupportable to the ears of them that heard it. Wow. So very interesting. A lot of insight into the bells. I love how they have the bells, because we're always curious about what they use those bells for and what kind of thing. But I mean, these guys are doing ceremonies. They're dressing humans as angels, and who knows if that was a chosen child, the way they would choose the lamas of Tibet. It could have been a sacred child. Who knows any of these things back in the day when the world was magical? I find it very hard to believe that all of these kind of magical things are useless or a fairy tale, or can be looked at from a perspective that it's quackery. I kind of more along the lines believe that as humans, we're kind of here to cultivate our existence. And if this is your existence, this is your reality, the one that's being described here, the one that like us, our Christian, etc. selves can't really grasp even in this writing, then, who are we to say that these people are crazy or something, or that that's not a man of God or an angel or something? We don't know how he was born. We don't know how anything. And they use these golds, these metals. They could be using substances as well, entheogens, mushrooms, teas, herbs, anything to acquire certain types of awakened states, or just states of mind that we can't even fathom today. And if you're constantly growing and existing within those kind of realities that we can't fathom, then who's to say that that's better or worse than what we've done here? How can we belittle it and be like, haha, he's the naked boy wearing little stuff like gold, and these people are crazy? Like, how can we honestly say that when these things may have existed? These cultural experiences, this election process may have been passed down for generations and generations and generations, and it incorporates metaphysics, it incorporates life, death, the gods, they have music, all these different processes. They had the 9 electors, so it's definitely not a democracy like we supposedly have, but who's to say? If we had a man of God or something, an actual truly divine being picking our ways, it would be maybe a little better than the corruption that just leeches all over the place. And that's what it seemed like. That's what this guy called out at the very beginning. He called out that corruption, because where power is on earth, where humans are together and need to kind of work together and exist together, there's always going to be a power struggle of some sort, someone trying to get the top amount of power from everyone else. And there's no denying that, whether you're on an island or in a country or everywhere. It makes me wonder how many years and generations of elections had passed before they got to this phase in this description that we read with Pinto. And how many bad elections occurred, how many people corrupt elections occurred before they got to this place, because that guy definitely at the beginning giving that speech has experienced many a corrupt election. And so I wonder, when did they invite the gods in? When did it become something that the celestials and the divine beings had to grant? Because that's kind of the way it should be. A lot of people back in the day, when you were becoming political office, you did it as a right and as a privilege, and you were proud of it. You weren't just doing it for the kickbacks, for the money, for the power, for the corruption, for the ability to lord over people, for the ability to do disgusting, freakish things and get away with it. You would do it because it was your power, and you were considered divine for doing that, dedicating your time here for the good of everyone else in the community. And that's what it needs to be brought back to. It will hopefully get to that point soon enough when we can weed out this corruption, because corruption just ruins everything. The further a people go on a path that should never have occurred, the more disastrous it becomes. It's like cancer. When you go, the cancer of life, and it's affecting millions and millions, maybe billions of people around the world. These nasty elections that are just failures of reality and failures of what is good and right and what the people want. And it's a shame, but hopefully it will be able to be fixed. So, hope you enjoyed this little glimpse of a different time and a different election type completely. And, it's good to dive back into these old times and see some of the culture, see some of the amazing things, some of the descriptions. And again, the music. I just love the music and the strange noise. I love when Pinto always describes that something happens amongst the community and then they create a noise that's just so alien to them. And I wonder what that is. I wonder if that, if they lost the ability to resonate with that voice over time, because the thousands of people around them in this civilization are resonating with it. They're all participating in it. They're all just feeling the power of the sound from the bells and from the people and from the other noises that people make. And they know what that sound means. They hear it spread and they do it. They join in. And what is that sound that makes these Portuguese and these Christians be like, what? That makes them blown away by it. How is it affecting their bodies? And I'm willing to believe that these ancient people and all of us had a strand of divinity in us that we're able to use, and we still have it somewhere. We just have lost it. It's been dumbed down. It's been shredded. And so we need to get it back. I know we can. Stories like this help to do that, help to remind us that, people in power, it is a divine right, and people have to treat it as such. And when you look at the world now, that is clearly not the case. So we have a lot of work to do. But again, stay positive. I know we can fix this mess, and we will. Bless you all. Enjoy Tartarian Tales.